Welcome to Going In Blind. I'm your host, Zach Tidwell. Hopefully, I don't sound so sick this time. And my guest today is an interesting mix of things. It's kind of a little bit of get to do some follow up for those of you that listened to the Adam Chire episode. I had so much that I wanted to talk to him about the business world afterwards that I just didn't get a chance to talk to him about. It's also kind of a bit of a throwback to Scott Harvey and getting to expand more on some of the stuff that I talked with him about, specifically in working with corporate leadership and things like that. But this woman's story is also very interesting because outside of her own very successful early corporate career, her own step in entrepreneurship, which began with buying another business on a credit card, of all things, actually saved her son's life. And a lot of wonderful things have come out of it since then. And I'm excited to dig into it all and for all of you to hear it. But before we do that, I do have a couple of quick announcements. You've heard me kind of running my mouth about this a little bit, but just like many of my guests, I do have a crazy story myself, and I've seen that sharing it saves lives. So I wrote a book about it. I just started the fourth draft of it today. I'm working with an editor. We have 2 more rounds of editing to go through, and then this thing will be out in the world. So if you're unfamiliar with my story and why I might have written a book, you can go over to my website at zachtidwell.com and read a little bit about it there. You can also join the mailing list to get updates about when the book is going to be released and deals for pre-ordering and things like that when it does come out, so that you can get it a little cheaper than most other people will be able to. Outside of that, you can also book me for speaking engagements there. And finally, the best way to help the show grow, if you've been listening for a while outside of word of mouth, is to leave a rating and review wherever you are listening. These episodes are also now video episodes, so if you'd like to watch your podcasts, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe and see my ugly mug talking to a bunch of people every week. So without any further ado, please welcome Miss Jennifer Hawkins. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I think we're about to have a lot to jump into here. Just, I guess that's kind of the whole point of the show and how it goes every week. But I really, it seems like the most appropriate place here is probably, I'll let you set the stage for it. I want to hear what led up to how you wound up purchasing this Sylvan Learning Center on a credit card at 29 years old and how that all came about.
Yeah,
Just run us through it.
it's a great it's an interesting story, right? So I had been working for corporate prior to that and came up through the ranks through insurance corporate world. Right out of high school, I was in a special program and I excelled. I was one of the youngest to get promoted into leadership. I had great success. For all accounts and purposes, I was recruited from one to another. It looked like I was on top of the world, and why on earth would I want to leave that?
Yeah.
And prior to the purchase of that Sylvan, my younger brother had been in a major car accident. He had struggled with his grades and confidence, and unfortunately, he ended up on doing drugs and things like that. And I watched the path that he had, ended up on because of his grades being so poor and his lack of confidence. Sports were taken from him, extracurriculars, all the different things, and he just spiraled. And that really stayed with me. That was my brother and I are 6 years apart. I'm the older. When you're that far apart, you have a motherly role on top of a sibling role. And so the accident, he ended up with major brain trauma. He was in a coma. We removed half of his brain. He's never been the same. His story is really difficult. And here
Was,
he is. Yo, go ahead.
was he still in high school at that point?
He was. Yep. So I was super young when it happened. He was super young. He was only 17, so here I am, my early 20s, and it was life changing for me. It was just really a major issue in my life. This was someone, I was super close to my brother. He was my little brother. He babysat my baby. He was the best little babysitter ever. And then all of these things ended up happening with him. And it was a brutal shock in my life. And I wanted to do something to change, and pay it forward for other kids who maybe I could make a difference with. And it became like this real thing for me. And I did look into Sylvan Learning Centers, and, it just didn't seem like a move that I could make until that opportunity came. So post 9/11, this particular Sylvan in North Idaho opened a month after 9/11, and they were Canadian. So in North Idaho, we're not far from the Canadian border, and they were really struggling. We weren't making it easy for anyone out of country to do anything with us, understandably. But
Yeah.
that obstacle proved detrimental. This poor center was performing the worst in the country. They couldn't get a lift, and just the value of it just wasn't there anymore. So they were trying to sell, and they wanted $250,000. And I was young. I was only 29 years old. I didn't have $250,000 on me, but I did have a good credit card and I had great credit. And I came back to them with all the reasons why I felt the value wasn't there and what I could do. Banks weren't lending money either. It was a brutal time, but they really needed to just get out of it, right? So the opportunity was there. And I bought it on my credit card, my personal credit card, negotiated it down. And I will never forget back then it was a fax. They faxed me back and said, you'll never regret this. You'll always look back and be so grateful for doing this. And the truth is that I was. We helped so many kids and just made a huge impact in lives. And that really affected me profoundly too, to be involved in mission work and really be able to make a difference in the lives of, these kids that reminded me of my brother. And so, although I couldn't help my brother, I could make a difference in my community. And that's where that led. And within 18 months, I scaled that Sylvan from the last ranking. And I'm talking, we weren't just last, like we were far cry.
Way back. Yeah.
Yeah, we were one of
Canadian
the we're in
last.
the stratosphere. It was so bad.
Yeah.
And landing within 18 months in the top 20% of the Sylvan nationwide. So that was huge. Really became a top franchisee, at a young age. And I loved it. And I believe a good piece of that was not only the foundation that I had gained from my corporate world, but also my passion for the mission, right? And for the kids and making a difference. So, yeah, it did change me. It really definitely made a difference in my life.
We got a couple things I want to pick your brain on here. So I have big age gaps in my family, a little bigger than yours. I'm 29. I have an 18-year-old sister and a 7-year-old sister.
Wow.
But my 18-year-old sister, so 11-year age gap, she
Mhm.
has Down syndrome. So I was an only child for 11 years. And then all of a sudden, now we had a person in our family with disability. And that changed our lives for the better in all ways. Obviously, she's a stud now. She's killing it. But like just it was a formative thing even for my adult parents for changing your views on the world, changing how you interact with people, a different level of empathy and a different level of, I think, just caring and accepting of people. So I wanted to lay that out for you so that you know that I have a similar experience. But I wanted to see for you, because you were a little older than I was when now someone in your family has a disability. I mean, can you dig into that more? Like for example, for us, I remember we used to use the word retard as like a filler word for things. Everything was, oh, that's retarded. This is retarded. That guy's retarded. And funny how you stop using stuff like that to talk about people when, you have a baby sister who's has a cognitive disability. And, I don't have a problem with people using that word. That's just personally something that I don't do. Obviously, if you called my sister retarded, I will fucking murder you. That's different. But
Yeah, for sure.
just using it as like a figure of speech, don't have an issue with it. But like for you, can you dig into that more? How that was for you, especially as a young adult, you're a young woman and kind of just now getting your way in the world, and now your baby brother's different.
It was to be honest, it was devastating. Just the um to know that at 17 you have the whole world in front of you, and then because of maybe some poor decisions, your whole world is is forever changed. And so how do we navigate making the fact that he still lived, even though now he's severely disabled, meaningful? And that I think was really tough, right? Like, when I think about Down syndrome, my vision for them, they're joyful. Like, they're a joy to be around. They are, that is a disability that just when you interact with a child, even an adult with Downs, they see the world in color and love and light and and all those things. When you're dealing with epilepsy and traumatic brain injury, everything is completely the opposite. It's very dark. It's a lot of paranoia, a lot of difficulty. Sometimes it can mirror schizophrenia. Like, it's brutal. And so for me, although my brother lived, it felt like he had died. And so that was really tough. And people really not understanding, what someone in that circumstances goes through day in, day out, the loneliness, right? The issues of never being able to take care of yourself. My brother speaks daily about, I didn't get a family. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have those things that, you know, I would have really wanted, even though I was 17 and fell into this bad place. It didn't mean that I had ever thought I wouldn't have this grown up life that, of having a family and that joy and all of those things. I just made really poor choices because I was feeling so bad about myself and my circumstance. And so that was really tough as an older sister who adored her little brother, seeing that potential gone. And so I had to really figure out how I was going to interact, how I was going to help him gain as much independence as he can, as well as, find meaning in his world. And we talk a lot about that. And so I think that although we both have disabled siblings, I think that, I think it's different when it happens when they're older as opposed to them being born this way, right? I think when you're born this way, we're not sitting back going woulda, coulda, shoulda all day. It's like this is the life. This is how she was born. We love her, we embrace her, we're so happy and and she's joyful. It's all those things. And then when something like a loss like that happens when they're 17, you know, you should be doing well in school, going to college, finding that person, that love of your life, that career of your life, all of those things. And that didn't happen. And so I think that there was some depression, there was some devastation. And so what I really sought to do was take all of those difficult feelings I had and that loss and what felt devastating and turn it into mission work where I can make a difference for anyone else in that situation before they ended up on that path like my brother, where sometimes there's no way back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm very thankful for. I shot myself in the head 6.5 years ago. Like I lost everything after that. And like, I'm very fortunate, obviously, that I survived, but that I retained all my cognitive function. Like I'm very conscious of that. every day. Like it is, that's so scary, man. It's, I've met a lot of people in other bad situations who didn't get as lucky as I did, whether and not from suicide attempts so much as just accidents like that. And it's, I don't know. It's hard. That's why I asked, like, I don't know. It's hard to put yourself in those shoes of seeing a family member have that big of a shift. Like
Yeah.
entirely your life is different forever.
Yeah.
Uh, when you say mission work, do you mean like centered around a mission, or were you literally doing mission work, like religious mission work?
No, you're right. It's centered around a mission. I
Yeah.
consider that, for me, it was a mission to help these children, right? And so I always need a high purpose in my work for me to keep that passion and stay engaged and that sort of thing. Obviously, Sylvan was personal, and so for me, it was a mission.
I guess I'm curious, and I promise we'll move along with the Sylvan stuff, but it's I can totally understand that, especially with the Sylvan thing. But I guess in finding, now, I have no corporate experience. I had the Marines, and then I was working in a hospital while I was in school before I shot myself, and then I've been an entrepreneur now for the past couple of years. It's in a corporate environment where it's not your own business. How do you find purpose in that? Is it specifically choosing a company that you can get behind what they are doing? I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I believe that depending on what your product is, right, any service can make a difference positively in people's lives, and that can become your mission and your passion. So, when I started at the Hartford Insurance Group, insurance protects your livelihood, everything that you've worked for when it's your home. So, for me, it was home and auto and that sort of thing. If you can imagine, most of us who own a home, that's where the majority of our money is tied up. And so to lose that and not be covered, that's a big deal. So that to me was a mission. That was a passion. How do you properly protect your assets, right? And so that's how I thought of it. When I moved around a little bit in at the Hartford, and I ended up at the AARP. And so that really was working with folks that were predominant, although it's 50 and older for AARP, most of our customers were, mid 60s, our early 60s, that sort of thing. And back then, they didn't have as high level skills, if you will, in business, insurance, things like that. I think, the generations have absolutely evolved. But back then, we really were counselors helping them. They were living on fixed incomes, a lot of them. Plus, they needed to protect their assets, all of these different things. And so that I took that counseling and helping them and making sure I was underwriting properly the risk so that our company didn't go under, that we, weren't experiencing losses that were terrible. So in my mind, I think I guess I am really good at finding my mission in the work that I'm doing. It matters to me whatever I throw myself into, and I find that if I keep that as my North Star, what is my mission, of what I'm trying to accomplish here, whether it's servicing my client and my company, which is typically where I'm at. Or when I was running the blood bank and or was recruiting donors for blood donation, that was the mission work, right? I need to save patients. I need to make sure that our organization is bringing in all that blood, so on and so forth. And so I'm always looking for that. What's the mission? Who am I serving? And what do I need to do to do that really well? Because I need to protect people or help people.
And I guess tying into that, so we had before I pulled you away from the main narrative thread here. We were talking about, you'd risen, you really just boosted this business that you bought, and then you just mentioned the blood banks. What's the tie between Sylvan and the blood banks, or was that the next step?
That was a crazy story. So here I was, successful at Sylvan. I had weathered two recessions. I had weathered the 9/11, right? Coming right off of that. And then also had weathered the 2008 recession.
Oh, so you had it for a long time.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And I loved it. It was a passion for me. It absolutely was. Now, I can't tell you during those recessions that every day felt great. It was tough. I had to get super creative. And I definitely, I stayed, in that top tier performance. And, some odd things started to happen for me. The first thing, I received a phone call from a headhunter who had looked through my LinkedIn and called me because her client was an advertising agency, and they were scaling and growing in leaps and bounds. So they had gone from 12 people that had been the core of this company for years to now they were the leaders and they had 80 employees. They had never been leaders before. They had never coached, developed. They had zero infrastructure. They had just been one great happy team. And now they had a real, thriving company with lots of clients, and they needed to work through that. And so the phone call was, hey, you know how to put infrastructure in place, which is the whole reason why I moved from the Hartford to Travelers and was recruited into Travelers, because I had been part of startup at the Hartford when I was promoted at 25, then was in startup at Travelers where I was recruited, again, putting that infrastructure in place, and then did it again at Sylvan. And that was threaded throughout my LinkedIn. And so she called me and said, we really want you to help us with this. And could we contract you? So I was supposed to be there for 12 months. I did it for 15 months. So that was out of the blue. I wasn't looking for that, but my Sylvan was doing really well. My leaders were doing fantastic. And I felt like, yeah, I can do this side hustle. Let's go. And then while I was doing that, I received a phone call from a potential franchisor of Sylvan. And because I was in that top tier level, as you can imagine, Sylvan would have people call me about my experience, right? So if they were looking to buy a Sylvan, they would call me and ask questions, the good, the bad, right? All of it. And I would talk to them. And in the meantime, I was sharing, just just talking, that currently I was doing this side hustle with this advertising agency. And he was looking to buy his Sylvan one state over. And he was like, wait a minute, that would be so great for me if I could work within the one I'm trying to buy and run yours remotely because it's doing so well. And I was like, I'm not for sale. Like, hold on a minute. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
a side hustle. I'm not for sale. And so he was like, "No, really, I'm serious. Like I'd really like to negotiate this with you." And so I went home and I told my husband, "Another weird day. Like here's what happened." And my husband looked at me and he said, "Jen, you know what? I think that we're meant to sell. You weren't looking to sell. These two anomalies happened, and I feel like, this is fate. This is, the divine. This is God. We're being told we need to sell this. And I think we need to really consider it." And I was like, well, then what am I going to do with myself? This is my mission work. This is personal, like for me. Like, this is my everything, my identity. This is who I become. And he was like, yeah, I just really think we're supposed to sell it. So I negotiated a deal. I was coaching and developing him, while he was getting his feet underneath him and that sort of thing. But in the meantime, I'm like, I've lost my identity. What am I going to do with myself? I have no idea. I felt very lost and isolated and really, kind of depressed. And my girlfriend told me about this opportunity at the blood center, and she said, you'd be perfect. And I was like, not a health, like I'm not blood. Like, no, that's not my gig. I do sales, operations, marketing. And she said, that's the part of the blood center that this position is in. You'd be recruiting donors for this amazing mission of saving lives. It's totally up your alley. And I I went ahead and applied and received my first interview. And I will never forget, I sat in there with the CEO and the HR director and the VP of operations, and I cried about how I sold my company and I don't know what I was thinking. And they hired me anyway. Aren't they crazy? But they did. Over other, people within the industry that had the chops, the background in it. And he just took a chance on me. There was something about me, and and then in the meantime, my son was sick. We couldn't figure out what was going on with him. And finally it got so bad. He was so sick, vomiting all the time. We're already little, he was little, but this was like on a whole nother level. And I had taken him to the doctor 3 different times, 3 Z-Packs later, right? Antibiotics, the whole nine, nothing's fixing it. And I went to our blood bank medical director. I wrote him an email and I said, I know I'm being one of those moms. I understand, like, I'm being crazy. I've been to the doctor, 3 times already, 3 different Z-Packs, but he is still very ill. And this was the Monday following my son's last day of school was Friday prior. So we're just at the beginning of summer. And I felt like I had just hit that send button, and that medical director called me on my desk phone. And when he started to talk to me, there was no nicety. There was no chit chat like I'm used to. And I had described a few of Ryan's symptoms, and he was drilling me. And it felt like it went on forever. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. I have no idea. It felt like forever. And at the end of the conversation, he said, Jennifer, Ryan has leukemia, and you need to get him into the doctor today. We need to get him into the hospital.
How
As you
old
can
was
imagine,
he?
he was 13.
Jeez.
So you can imagine now again, here I am, another mission. My personal and professional life are colliding in a way that I never expected, right? Um, and he would enter the hospital that day, and he didn't get out until the holidays. And he relapsed a couple months later. He had to go back into the hospital again. And we had to get him into remission so he could get a bone marrow transplant. We then had to travel to Seattle, where, he received radiation and bone marrow transplant. And so again, he was in the hospital until the holidays. And then the following year, he wasn't allowed to go to school. So this whole time, he really doesn't enter high school. He's supposed to go into high school. And his whole world is upside down. And, in the meantime, I'm running the blood bank, the blood center for the recruitment from the hospital room for 2.5 years. And we performed at top tier levels. I built leaders, and we scaled. We kept scaling, and I kept getting promoted, sitting on a hospital bench. It was a crazy time.
Can you dive more into what it was like, just as a family having, you've got a, is he your only son?
He is my only son. I had an older daughter who, frankly, was, somewhat imploding. It was very difficult on her. She walked away from college. We were all taking turns. He never slept alone, and he never was alone during the day. We were all there. My husband and I took turns every night. So if you can imagine, for 2.5 years, we almost were never in the same bed. My daughter gives up college, right? Everything. And in the same token, my husband also was in a brand new leadership role in his organization. So one of us is there during the day out of the hospital room running our departments, and one of us is there at night and just taking turns. And we're like ships in the night, right? We meet for dinner. We always have dinner together in the hospital room. And then whoever was there all day goes home, and whoever was, at work all day sleeps over. And it was a crazy, crazy time. But Ryan's cancer was acute myeloid leukemia, which is rare for children. And those rounds of chemo are one after the other, and they're so violent. They make you so ill that you don't leave the hospital. It's dangerous for you to not
Wow.
be there.
What was that like as a mother having to watch your kid go through that?
I think all the time about like how I was working to compartmentalize. As you can imagine, I got pretty darn passionate about blood donation because Ryan was using blood. So I was very passionate to make sure we had enough blood on the shelf every day. So I was constantly in the media or talking to people about it and that sort of thing. And then personally, I am in the hospital room all the time and my I have to keep positive, right? Because Ryan is already wondering if he's going to live or die every day. And I certainly can't look like I'm questioning it. So there's nowhere for me to go to kind of fall apart, right? Like I have to keep it together. And I think sometimes, and that happened with my brother's accident too. We saw it was the same kind of thing where every day you're going to that hospital. He was in a coma, then he was in the rehabilitation. And I'm sure your parents went through that with you too, right?
Yeah.
When you deal with what that is, you're back and forth all the time, and you have to stay in an upbeat status to keep that patient, your family okay. You can't fall apart because they get to fall apart. You don't get to do that. And also, I didn't want him to fall apart. I wanted him to stay strong. I needed him to stay strong. He couldn't give up. And so, as a mother, I think that, there were days where I had to be stern with him. That was awful, right? I need you to, handle this pain right now. I need you. I know you keep vomiting. I know everything is awful right now. I know that, every time you go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom in a hat and they measure everything. And I know it's mortifying and all of those things. And while I understand and I have massive compassion, I cannot let you slack for 1 second because your life depends on it. And everything felt heightened like that. His life depended on it. And it felt just the same as with my little brother. His life depended on it. And those are hard things to face, right? And as a mom, you have to stay tough so that they do the things that they have to do, even though your heart is breaking because they're crying and they're hurt. It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah. That's so it was 2.5 years, and then he was fully in remission by the end of that.
Yeah, we were so lucky. We had a perfect donor match for the bone marrow transplant.
Mhm.
And just a little shameless plug here. People do not get on the bone marrow transplant list and be the match enough. It's typically a lot of our donors actually come from Israel and Germany because their military requires them to get on the registry. So I will say, just a shameless plug, please donate blood and please get on the bone marrow transplant registry because you never know when you're going to save a life. But yeah, that was it. It was a crazy, crazy time and having to wait for that match. But that's ultimately what saved him. And there's just that your immune system is suppressed purposefully, and so you have no fighters. So anything can get you sick, right? And so you really are quarantined and that sort of thing for your safety. So it was a long time before he could go to school. And as you can imagine, you leave eighth grade, you haven't experienced those first couple of years where you understand how high school works. And now you're entering the stream in as like a junior, where junior, that upper level classmen versus lower level classmen.
Those are young men instead of kids. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a tough transition for him socially. So watching him flourish and blossom and still graduate at 17, graduate with a 4.0.
Jeez.
I know. He was bound and determined. He wouldn't take time off. So just to paint a picture for you as the mom, he took 0 hour and he had an hour after class, and he also took summer school to make that all happen because he had to make up a lot. And I would drop him off at 5:30 in the morning and he would be vomiting in the bush. He's sick every morning and he still is sick every morning. His graft versus host still affects his gut and his skin, and all these years later. And yeah, so every morning I'd watch him start walking to the school, vomit in a bush because he didn't have enough time in the morning to kind of get that all of that going and get that out of him. And then he'd walk into class and go start his day. He was fearless, and gosh, just the strength. I can't even describe his strength. And I imagine your parents and your family feel exactly that way about you.
Yeah, I guess I know they really started to do a lot better as I started to do better. I'm assuming that was by that point where you see him chucking in the bushes, then going into crushing school. You're like, all right, this is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still tell myself, he's got this. Right. And that's
Yeah,
what, you see them. Yes, it's not easy, but it's like that. He's got this.
that's really cool. So, what what's next after that? We've got, yeah, I wasn't sure how long it would take us to get through what it's like having a child with leukemia. I mean, that feels like
Yeah.
that would be the
And you,
horror story for any parent to hear. So,
yeah, it was, right? Because you just don't know. You
yeah,
don't know. And it challenges everything in you. It challenges your faith. It challenges everything you think. And
are
eh,
there
yeah.
are there any big resources that were kind of pivotal for you guys to be able to rely on there that other parents who maybe have children going through something like that should look up?
You know what? I was blown away. So we were in Spokane has its own children's hospital, and that's where we were. And I have to tell you, those nurses are become family. Like the docs, the just the staff, even the janitors become people that you're close to because you're there day in and day out. And there are so many different organizations, and I was blown away by how wonderful they were. Um, in Acoin is a huge one. And that one is the American Children's Cancer Organization. And then ours is of the Inland Northwest, so it's called Acoin. And I know they've rebranded, so I apologize. But I don't have their new name, but I will say they show up with this incredible amount of resources. This just, this organization, this organization, this organization, and they sit with you and they're going through everything. And then it's, do you need a gas card? Because people don't realize all that back and forth, right? It's the parking fees. Just, you can't go make dinner at home. So you're buying food every night in the hospital. That's not cheap. It all adds up, right? Your insurance isn't covering that. So they would show up with all these different resources. And then the nurses were so incredible. They set us up with mentors, moms and dads who had been through this already the year prior. I will tell you that is priceless. That was priceless for us. Different groups, right? That you can go and, just sit in, talk to each other about what you're experiencing and how sad and how do you keep yourself motivated and going and not falling apart in front of your kids, right? So there's that peer, counseling groups that you're going to and things like that. um I think that for me, of those groups were all amazing and there were so many of them. um probably the biggest blessing for me was the mentor. And we mentor now too. My husband and I both, whenever we can, the nurses know, send them our way, because that was life-changing for us. I don't know how we would have gotten through all of that without these incredible families, these parents that, were always there for us when we called and when we needed them.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, you forget how, I guess the simple power of having someone who knows what you're going through that you can lean on in times like that.
Yeah. And Zach, that was a signature for my success in organizations as well. I had peer groups all the way Hartford, Travelers, Sylvan Learning Center. I created peer groups when I was consulting for the advertising company, and then created a coalition at the blood banks in my state. I believe in peer groups with all my heart. I believe in peer, counseling, peer consulting, peer learning, all of those different things, because it really, when you can open up and share what you know and then learn from others, and it's always that kind of exchange, right? It's never, I'm sure every podcast you have, you walk away with gold nuggets every time, right? Learning something, understanding something better and differently than maybe you did before you entered the conversation. So I believe strongly in mentorship. I believe, in the power of people getting together, collaborating, sharing, learning. And that's why I created in my organization that I have today, Launched Performance, my executive advisory cohorts. I have elite execs in those cohorts sharing together how to solve problems. It's a think tank. And we walk away with solid action plans that need to be implemented immediately. And then they talk to each other throughout the month until the next meeting. What's working, what's not? How can we tweak this? What would be better? But those individual action plans from sharing out, this is what's happening. This is the pressing issues today as a leader. And that's really working well. And so again, it's been one of my signature successes all these years.
Are these C-suite execs or what?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
They are.
Are when you got promoted to leadership over the course of these different areas that you've worked in, or did you make it to the C-suite?
Yes. So
Okay.
that role, well, at Sylvan Learning Centers, I had quite a few different centers and about 80 employees. So it was it was a larger franchise. We were doing great things. And multiple sites, a lot of pop-ups, that sort of thing. And then when I was the executive at the blood center, I had all the departments event. So as a senior director in recruitment, I had 7 states. I had volunteers that were doing blood drives, all of these employees. So, quite a few there. But then when I was then promoted to regional director, I had not only the recruitment department, but I had phlebotomy, manufacturing, distribution, fleet, HR, everything fell under me. The labs, cross match, all of it as that regional director. I either had a direct or an indirect line. And so I had to know something about all of those departments, and I had to intimately know it on my direct lines. And so again, scaled, really outperformed each time I moved into a different area. And so, but a big piece of that has really come from, so for example, when I became the regional director, we had no voice. We had no training programs, nothing. Corporate was like, hey, there you go. You're the regional director. And it was like, that's swell. I have a sense of what I need to be doing, but this is new. Most of these departments are new to me. So what does this all look like? And so I said, hey, we have about 12 of them across the country. I'm going to start a peer group, right? And so again, I scaled very quickly and had success right out of the gate because of these peer groups, because of this cohort that I started. And the same with that coalition that I started at the blood bank too, where different blood banks across the state, that was rare in our industry. But we needed legislative changes, we needed grants, we needed all kinds of things. And it was at the height of the pandemic. So I started, my leader said, I'm not really down for this pandemic thing. I'm leaving. And it was like, you know, nose goes, Jennifer, you're it. And it was like, whoa, you know. So on top of having to learn everything in a everyday world, now let's just throw the pandemic on top of it. Nobody's donating blood because they're afraid to get near each other. You know, my staff is sick all the time with COVID. And I can't get on the vaccination list. I have legislative issues that are precluding me from being able to train appropriate. I mean, I could go on all day with the problems that I was having. And the peer group, you know, again, having a peer group, how are we going to manage through this pandemic across the country? Because, by the way, I'm not selling cars. It's not like today we don't get to sell cars. My problem is if we don't collect blood, people die. And so if you can imagine how stressful that was during the pandemic, we banded together and we were making it happen. And I was at that top level during that time frame.
That's awesome. And so, how long ago did you start Launch?
I left the organization and began launched performance in March and April of 2024.
Okay. So, still, you're a year and a half in here,
Yes,
full time.
full time. And I love
Wow.
it.
And I could tell from, because I know earlier you had mentioned you got into insurance straight out of high school, but
Mhm.
on your LinkedIn profile, it says Cornell. Did you go to school for business or was this all high
Yep.
school? Okay. Okay. Wow.
So I took certificate programs, so multiple executive leadership certificate programs. I love Cornell. In terms of, I feel like I was so blessed. So not only did I do that, but I also, while I was in insurance, I received a CPCU designation. So if you think about it in the insurance world, it's, you know, underwriting and assessing risk and that sort of thing, because that's a big component of what I was doing, and what fell directly into my world. So although that education isn't all nice and in a bow of here's my 4-year degree. I just went to, you know, XYZ school and got my bachelor's in business. Mine is, you know, I have my insurance degree. I have these 4 certificates from Cornell. I have all of these different, I think I explained at the height of this that the Hartford Insurance Group being only 25 pouring into us with that millions of dollars worth of investment in vendors and top um, coaches across the country. I've really been blessed like that. So although it's piecemealed, if you will, it definitely is at that master's caliber. And I've just been really super fortunate that each organization I've worked for, either I was pouring into myself, you know, while I owned Sylvan, or they were pouring into me. And I've just been really fortunate.
That's wild. It's a wild story. It's
Yeah.
just, yeah. And it's interesting because it's so foreign to me again, because it's all corporate. It's different, but it's so cool that nestled in there is this happened to save my son's life. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
weird how life works out. But where can people find Lodge Performance? Where can they reach out to you to get into these peer groups? What is that? What does all this look like?
Yeah, so we have the peer groups, and I also have my signature programs, where I work with mid-level leaders to really get them to that executive leader space so that their teams are performing, that they're building leaders underneath them, and that they're effective leaders. And also I work with founders and business owners to scale their organizations, and work with leaders to understand their metrics and that sort of thing. So that's kind of a side gig. And then one-on-ones, I do speaker gigs. And I also do workshops and things like that. So I'm open for all of those things and consulting and fractional work. And you can find all of that information on me at launchedperformance.com. No spaces. And you can find me on LinkedIn, just Jennifer Hawkins. So I would love to connect.
Sweet. Sounds good. That's easy two places. It's a lot easier to find you there. I'll have links for that stuff in the show notes. If anything else you want to throw up there before we wrap this thing up.
No, I just really appreciated the conversation today. And that we look at people as people, right? It's not just our business world, it's also our personal world and how they can affect each other and make us who we are. And we bring our whole selves, to everything that we do every day. And, I've just been, even through all that adversity, just so lucky to be where I'm at today. And I'm just really grateful that everything has worked out the way that it has. I've been really lucky.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for the sweet note to leave it on. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed my time and getting to know you, Zach.
Yeah.
You're amazing. Your story's incredible.
Thank you. And thanks everyone at home for listening to another episode of Going In Blind. I guess I am still sick because I'm super stuffy now as I'm trying to say this, but um, thank you. Please, if you've been listening to the show for a while, please leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening. And again, if you want to watch the podcast, go subscribe on YouTube. And remember to share this around with another curious mind who needs to hear it. I'll see you next time.